Welcome to Divided We Vote, Evangelicals and the 2016 election. I'm Julie Roys. Over the next hour, we're going to explore what has arguably been the most divisive presidential campaign in our lifetime. This election has not only pit conservatives against liberals, but also conservatives against each other, specifically evangelical conservatives. Evangelicals supporting GOP nominee Donald Trump accuse so-called never-Trumpers of handing the election to Democratic nominee Hillary Clinton. And never-Trump evangelicals accuse Trump supporters of tarnishing their Christian witness, especially in the wake of revelations about Trump's lewd remarks concerning women. In this rancorous political climate, how can Christians engage constructively? What criteria should we use when selecting a candidate? And what will the long-term effects of this election be on the religious right? I'll be exploring these questions and more with a panel of three prominent evangelical leaders with three different perspectives. But first, here's what a number of leading evangelicals are saying about supporting Donald Trump, who's admittedly a morally flawed candidate.
These statements were lewd, offensive, and indefensible, but they're not enough to make me vote for Hillary Clinton.
This election is a disaster for the American people. It's an excruciating moment for American evangelicals.
There's a conversation in Hollywood where he's trying to look like he's macho.
We shouldn't have been surprised about this. It's really kind of interesting to me that all of a sudden this has turned into something that's been blown up.
This is bad boy talk, and of course that's what she wants everybody to talk about. She doesn't want anybody to talk about her betrayal of America's national security secrets.
What was your reaction as a voter?
That's like a real issue.
Listen, voting for someone is not the same as endorsing their entire character.
You know, I've been listening to some of these evangelical leaders since I was 10 years old say character matters, that the moral tenor of leadership matters, that the coarsening of a culture is bad for all of society, that the bully pulpit ought to stand up for values. We've been told we ought to vote our values. I'm not the one who's moved.
Without making it about personality, and I certainly don't deny that this is a riveting spectator sport, and Donald Trump is an oversized personality. But for these voters, it's about the issues.
Donald Trump has not been running as a choir boy. That's not who he is.
When it comes to Donald Trump, evangelicals are going to have to ask the huge question: is it worth destroying our moral credibility to support someone who is beneath the baseline level of human decency for anyone who should deserve our vote?
So as you can see, there's a wide range of opinion within the evangelical community concerning Donald Trump, and there's an awful lot to unpack in what we just heard. And joining me to do that are three evangelical leaders representing a broad spectrum of opinion. One of these is someone you just saw defending Donald Trump. She's Charmaine Yoest, a senior fellow with American Values and also the former president and CEO of Americans United for Life. So Charmaine, thank you so much for coming, and I'm glad you can be with us.
Thank you, Julie. I really appreciate you putting this panel together.
Well, it's just great to have you. Also joining us is Dr. Erwin Lutzer, pastor emeritus of Moody Church, and also a prolific author and radio Bible teacher. In fact, his 3 Moody radio programs are heard on more than 1,000 outlets in the United States. So Dr. Lutzer, as always, such a pleasure to have you with us.
Thank you so much, Julie. I'm glad to be a part of this.
And also joining us is Dr. Vincent Bacote. He's an associate professor of theology at Wheaton College in Wheaton, Illinois. He's also the director of the Center for Applied Christian Ethics at Wheaton College and the author of The Political Disciple, A Theology of Public Life. So, Dr. Bacote, thank you so much for joining us.
It's great to be with you.
So what I'd like to do is just establish first where each of you are in this election, who you're supporting, and how you feel about the candidates. So let me start with you, Charmaine, and obviously we saw a little bit of where you stand, but you are not only voting for Donald Trump, but endorsing him and encouraging other people to do that as well. Explain why you have that position.
Well, I am, Julie, and I think this is such an important and difficult time for all of us, so I'm glad that you're really delving into this. For me, I started my political career working in the Reagan White House many years ago, and I've seen a lot of different elections, a lot of different campaigns come and go. And I think what people need to stay focused on is we have one of the most brilliant governing systems in the entire history of the world. We've lasted a long time, and the way that the founders put things together has worked really well. And this system of this campaign has gone through exactly the way that the rules are set up. And here, coming down to the end, we have 2 candidates, one for each party. And you have a choice between those 2 candidates. So you have to judge them based on the issues, on the totality of the argument. And for me, when I look at the fact that we have the Supreme Court on the line, we could have up to 4 vacancies on the Supreme Court with this next president. That means the next president who appoints those justices will be determining the shape and the focus of our judiciary for a generation to come. I think that issue alone really kind of makes a decision for me personally. But I've also argued to people that it's not just that. It's also, going back to my time in the Reagan White House, I worked in presidential personnel. So something that's very important to me and that a lot of people outside of Washington don't know is that each president has the opportunity when they come in to appoint between 3,000 and 7,000 people throughout their administration who are going to operationalize, to make their policies come to life and to implement them. And so when you look at the fact that this next president is going to appoint a Secretary of Health and Human Services, a Secretary of Defense, you know, all throughout the government, those kinds of positions are supremely important. And for me, I look at the fact that Donald Trump has appointed already his vice presidential candidate, who is someone who comes from the evangelical community, who is a strong pro-lifer, who has stood for our values throughout this campaign. His campaign manager is a friend of mine, someone who's been in the pro-life movement for a very long time. So Donald Trump has surrounded himself by people of faith and by people who have stood and fought for the pro-life movement for a very long time, and that's deeply important to me.
But then again, an awful lot of evangelicals saying they just can't bring themselves to vote for him. I'm sure it was hard going up against Al Mohler and having to defend Donald Trump, but you feel like it's worth it, and we'll unpack that a little bit. But I want to go to Dr. Lutzer. And Dr. Lutzer, from my understanding, you were asked to endorse Donald Trump, even invited to a meeting with him, but you kind of backed away from that, though you are voting for him.
I was actually invited to one of the meetings that he had with evangelicals, and I declined that. So I have never endorsed a political candidate and will not on this show either. And I do that for 2 reasons. Number one, I don't want Christianity to be identified with a political party, because then it becomes a stumbling block to the gospel. And the second reason is because I've always argued that the person that I endorse may end up being an embarrassment. And so, you know, you're kind of stuck with the endorsement. But having said that, I will say that I am going to very reluctantly, nonetheless, pull the lever or touch the button for Donald Trump. Now, who would have ever believed that we would be in the predicament that we are in? When the primary season started, I believed that Donald Trump had a ceiling, that once his supporters had their say, someone else would emerge. I can identify with the sticker, the bumper sticker in Chicago that says, "I already hate our next president." And the reason for that is because we are faced with an impossible choice. So I cannot endorse Donald Trump like Charmaine has. But at the end of the day, there are reasons that I'm sure we'll get into, in addition to those that Charmaine has mentioned, where what we need to do is to make a choice. It is not a pleasant choice, but here we are, and we have to choose. In my opinion, we have to choose. And I would take the position that we should choose one of the 2 presidential candidates. So that's my position.
Now, you don't see saying that you're voting for Donald Trump as an endorsement.
Well, to some extent, you know, as I was coming here, I was thinking of that because I knew that you were going to ask me who I was going to vote for.
Yeah.
But I think that I am not endorsing him in the sense that I am not saying, as others have on TV, he's our man, he's the right guy for this moment, etc. And of course, even when you speak about endorsement, I'm sure that it means something for Charmaine, it may mean something else for somebody else. But I have never been out there telling people you ought to vote the way in which I am voting, because I'm putting my name next to Donald Trump. I would not do that. I feel very keenly the criticisms that come to those who believe that they do endorse him. I'm thinking particularly of pastors who have to maintain their independence and make sure that people understand that the gospel is not a political party.
It's been a difficult thing, I think, for pastors, and I think having someone like Donald Trump at the head of the ticket. But let me go to you, Vincent, because my understanding is you're not voting for Hillary Clinton or Donald Trump, which is a little bit safe in Illinois because, let's face it, we know who's going to win this state. Unless something, I've talked to some people that are like, you never know. All bets are off with this election because it's so atypical. But why do you feel that you can't vote for either one?
There's reasons why they both have incredible unfavorable ratings, right? And so I'm trying to emphasize, and I'm telling people to think about the rest of the ballot. I think one of the problems that we have with this election and with other presidential elections is the way that people respond to what goes on with presidential candidates. Is people think we're electing a monarch, even though we're a country that was founded because we don't want to have a monarch. And I think the fact is that we do need to remember this government that Charmaine was talking about, that we do have a separation of powers and a balance of powers. And we need to be thinking about who's going to be in Congress, but we also need to be thinking about we're electing at our local level. Because when it comes to how people live their everyday lives, most of the things that are going to be impacting them are not going to be impacted by the person that's in the executive branch. They're going to be impacted by what your congressmen are doing, but also what the people at your local level are doing. And we need to have a lot of political attention to that. And generally, people don't pay attention to that like they should. They sort of set aside that dimension, that responsibility, that opportunity of being citizens. And so this is a great time for people to, I think, become more educated about that and to emphasize that. Another dimension of this, I think, that has to be talked about, though, is part of the challenge with, Hillary in some ways is a known quantity in terms of, okay, she's sort of a political pragmatist. She's been known for being very liberal, so that's not a surprise. And really, actually, Donald Trump's been a known quality before he became a political figure. The Apprentice made Donald Trump, it kind of softened the fact that he was sort of a boorish, narcissistic person. And he became a sort of lovable, narcissistic person and was never the worst person.
Depending on who you talk to.
Well, the show was popular for a reason, right? I mean, he became much more accessible, much more likable. Mm-hmm. And I do think, as Pastor Lutzer said, that, no one thought, I'd love to know the number of people who said, he's not going to get the nomination, right? Well, you had 19 people trying to get the nomination. I think that created the problem, along with the fact that Trump knows how to do television, knew how to make it about him, and he seized upon a similar thing to Bernie Sanders seized upon, which is getting certain people who felt disenfranchised, feeling like somebody's actually paying attention to them. So he did that, and he did that well enough to get the nomination. Now, another dimension, though, about him that I think one has to talk about is that there are a lot of people, I think their rhetoric makes them nervous because they think that he plays up divisions in society and that he makes people with pigmentation like mine nervous, makes people, now I think, do I think Donald Trump's a racist? At first I had a conversation with him. I think they might discover, maybe I was wrong in thinking he was a racist, but his rhetoric certainly has played into people who have those inclinations being emboldened to, think more of a white is right type of thing. Now, those people are out there, and those people have been more bold to make themselves present.
And is that why you're not voting
Absolutely
for him?
not. No.
Okay,
another reason I'm not voting
for
for him is I don't think he knows anything about public policy.
Can I
So that's another reason why. Wait 1 second, please. And
I have a whole list of things here.
I think not just the Supreme Court issue concerns me significantly, but the president doesn't just handle the Supreme Court. The executive office handles all kinds of things. And when I think about the totality of the president's job, the president being the leader, we're essentially really the only real superpower. Putin's trying to do some kind of thing, but Russia isn't what it was. And I think about all the things that a president needs to do. I don't see him as being the person that should have the job.
So why not vote for Hillary?
Because, I think that she is that part of that pragmatism has played out in a way that to the left and being pushed to the left by Bernie Sanders. You have that Democratic platform that's pretty extreme. Most platforms don't get all the way through, but it's a pretty scary document.
Okay, Charmaine?
That's actually a really good point about the platform, and I know Dr. Lutzer wanted to talk about that a little bit, but there were really 2 points that you made that I wanted to address. The first one being your point about the fact that the president isn't going to affect the everyday lives of the voters.
I did not say that he was going to affect
not as
everyone.
much.
I said not to the extent that the local things are going to affect people's everyday life. Their school boards and the things that happen in their towns, the things that happen in their counties, that happens in
Here's
their
the problem
states.
with that argument in this particular context of this election is I'm a big believer in federalism, and I think, you know, the trickle-up theory of public policy development is one of the greatest things about American public policy. But the reality of what we're facing with a Hillary Clinton presidency and the judiciary that has run amok. I mean, think about the fact that the judiciary is the branch that imposed Roe v. Wade and imposed abortion and demand on the American people. She will use the judiciary to impose a liberal agenda even more broadly than we've already seen in this next presidency. And when we're talking about people of faith, one of the issues that we need to be really concerned about related to the judges is religious liberty, and that's really very much on the table. We know from the WikiLeaks emails, we've seen a lot of anti-Catholic, anti-evangelical kinds of language coming out of her camp. I'm very, very concerned about the religious liberty issue. And I'd really like to take on this idea somehow that Donald Trump is racist. I think that he has been damned by association in that there have been some people who've kind of come out of the woodwork who have supported him. I don't know that that's really an entirely fair accusation to level at a candidate. Every candidate has to deal with the fringe elements. Hillary Clinton has fringe elements on the left who are supporting her, and yet she never gets criticized for that. And I really don't understand why we aren't paying attention to the fact that one of the most inspirational elements of the Trump campaign, Trump-Pence campaign to me, is the fact that he was willing to go to Detroit, to go to a black church, to spend time there. When was the last time that you saw a Republican candidate who was willing to do that? He may not be completely smooth, and people have criticized him for not having, this completely, fully developed agenda. But, I actually was at that meeting of evangelicals and Donald Trump, and one of the first questions that was asked of him was a question about racism and race relationships. And I really thought it was interesting because his response was to come back and immediately start talking about structural issues in the inner city and getting people jobs. It was very concrete, it was very real, it wasn't pandering. And you've seen this theme throughout the campaign where he's talked about the fact that race relationships are undermined dramatically by economic structures and by the fact that people can't get jobs. And I think that that's encouraging that he's willing, despite the fact that he's continually criticized on this question of being racist, he's still, even as late as last week, he was talking about issues facing the inner city. And I think he's to be commended for that.
I'll give you two reasons why. Reason number one, all African Americans don't live in inner cities. Everything he says when he talks about African Americans, he talks about as if all African Americans live in inner cities and if law and order is the only thing you need to do. And I'm glad you mentioned the economic piece because that has not been what he's highlighted. He's highlighted the law and order, suggesting that most African American communities are crime-ridden communities. There are a lot of African Americans, they're not all poor and living in a ghetto.
Well, I'm aware of that.
I know you're aware of that. In fact, my point is, but that's the public rhetoric. That's what he has said in every debate when he's talking about African American communities. So I agree with you.
But that's the context in which people are asking him the question, what are you going to do about these issues?
There's more. You just mentioned economic stuff. He didn't mention the economic stuff. He mentioned law and order, and he mentioned inner cities. He didn't talk about blacks who are in suburbia. He didn't talk about the fact that because of gentrification, you have all kinds of African Americans and poor people moving into the suburbs and the collar counties.
No, come on, be fair. He's also talked about bringing school choice to the inner cities and to all kinds of communities. So I think you're not being fair in terms of taking his comments out of context.
Let's look for a second. I just want to go to.
We disagree about that.
We have some polls that are really interesting on this because when we talk about the racial divide, there is a huge divide right now. But first of all, none of you are actually supporting Hillary Clinton. I think that's important to note. But within the evangelical community, she actually does have considerable support. In fact, a recent poll conducted by Lifeway Research found that 31% of evangelicals are voting for Hillary Clinton. 45% are voting for Donald Trump. Another 8% are voting for Libertarian Gary Johnson. The remaining are undecided or perhaps voting for someone like Independent Evan McMullin or Green Party candidate Jill Stein. However, when you divide evangelicals along racial lines, some drastic differences emerge. Among white evangelicals, 65% are voting for Trump and only 10% for Clinton. But among evangelicals of other ethnicities, the percentages are almost the complete inverse. 62% say they are voting for Clinton, and only 15% are voting for Trump. So clearly, there is a huge racial divide in this election. And my concern, you know, as I've seen in other elections, I mean, the last election, the GOP failed. And if you're a conservative, which I am, I care about what's going to happen to the GOP in the future. But the GOP failed, by and large, to get any ethnic minorities on board. I mean, even the Asian population, which is conservative socially, not voting for GOP. Hispanics not voting for GOP. And George W. Bush, he got that Hispanic vote. Now, with this election, I wonder what's going to happen to the GOP brand, because, not necessarily because of the policies of Donald Trump, but the rhetoric. When you say, I'm building a wall, I have so many Hispanic friends that have said to me, I hear that and I just feel like he hates me.
Well, you know, part of this, though, Julie, I hear what you're saying, but I think to be fair is that there is this huge headwind going up against the mainstream media that is going to take anything a Republican says and distort it and throw this big, fat, racist label on it. It's just, you know, this constant drumbeat of that's racist, that's racist, that's racist. And when you put that frame around anything that someone from the Republican or the conservative side says, it's very difficult to get traction. So, you know, this racial divide has been a long-standing thing. Yes, it has gotten worse in this election, but I would argue that the headwinds have gotten worse in this election, too.
Dr. Lutzer?
I'm glad that I have the privilege of being in between these two, and I'm learning from each side. Yeah.
I'm learning too.
Yeah. You know, the thing is this, that when it comes to Donald Trump, though, in the media, and Charmaine, you know that I'm sure that in many respects I'm on your side in this, but Donald Trump has given the media lots of fodder that puts him in negative light. I mean, we could go through the comments, even going back to, you know, the Muslim family whose son was killed, and how he handled that, when you would think that anyone would handle it differently, and thank the family for the fact that their son was in effect in the military, and you are sorry that he died. There's so many things too. So it could be that the media is very much opposed to Trump. I think that that probably is true. Well, we know that it's true. But what grieves me is that Trump keeps giving them reason to do that. The way I look at it, Julie, is you'll notice, and maybe the camera can even pick this up, I asked my administrative assistant to actually print out the two platforms. I'm sorry that the Democratic one has some notes on it. But, you know, I did not know that these were this thick. I mean, we're talking about 70 or 80 pages. I was thinking 5 pages.
And did you read all of those, Dr. Lutzer?
No, I didn't.
Okay.
But I looked through it. The thing about the GOP, and this is why ultimately in this very tough decision, I have to come down on this side, is when Hillary Clinton was asked about who she might appoint to the Supreme Court, one of the things that struck me is she did not mention the Constitution. She said, well, you know, we don't want to overturn this, we want this, and we want this.
It's a living document.
It's a living document. It's putty to somebody who wants to shape it according to the thing. And somebody has well said, show me your laws and I will show you your God. I mean, if the Supreme Court believes there is no law above itself, it becomes God. If I believe that there's no law beyond me and I shape my own, I become God. The big issue in the legal aspect is huge. You know, I wrote a book or two about Hitler, 2 actually, in which it became very clear that he changed Germany by laws. And he was the supreme lawgiver, and once he spoke, that was the law. In fact, even the killing of Jews was not wrong, according to Hitler, because they were Untermensch, they were subhuman. So laws are important. So, you know, the GOP declaration stresses the fact that the Constitution must be honored and it must be upheld. It talks about the freedom of government interference, traditional marriage, you know, marriage of a man and a woman, the health care thing, you know, which seems to be out of control, though that might be debatable.
And that's definitely an area where we see the federal government impacting our lives in major, major ways.
And a strong military, and then the protection of life, as Charmaine said. So, you know, here's the way I view it, all right. Here you have two people, both of whom are flawed. Flawed in terms of what they say. I believe that both play very fast and loose with the truth, to put it in a very nice way, and so forth. So what are we going to do? I want to have some kind of say as to who the president is going to be, so that's why I'm going to vote. And to those that are out there who say, well, I'm not going to vote for either, you know, your vote is being wasted. And so I think you have to think about that carefully, though I respect and understand why it is that you might take that point of view.
But let me drill in on that.
Yeah.
Because I've heard this so much, your vote is wasted. I live in Illinois. We have never, I mean, I don't know when the last time was that there was a GOP presidential candidate that was actually got the support of Illinois. My votes, I mean, I'm looking at that. I voted for the GOP.
Reagan in '84, I think.
Was it Reagan?
I mean, that was a landslide. I think
maybe,
Mondale only got
right.
Minnesota.
I mean, this is the thing, is you're never going to recreate the turning of our politics until everyone is vested. You know, Vincent, I totally understand where you're coming from. But listen, Martin Luther said that you're not fully confessing Christ unless you are fighting where the battle is. And right now, this is where the battle is for the future of our country.
Let me say, where is the battle? Because here is the question for us as evangelicals. And this is where this thing, I think, has gotten so especially heated. But here's the thing. I'm having these conversations with people I never disagree with in politics, right? Because there are Trump supporters, and there are some who are saying there's no way I'm going to vote for Trump because he's morally flawed, he's morally unfit. And then we have the religious right that was based, the moral majority was all based on getting candidates who had our worldview and who had character. And now we have Ralph Reed, who said 18 years ago in regard to Bill Clinton, we care about the conduct of our leaders and we will not rest until we have leaders of good moral character. Now, a 10-year-old tape of a private conversation, he says, should rank low on our hierarchy of concerns. It seems like we're throwing character out. And here's the other thing, though. There's a poll, and maybe you saw this, that was done by the Public Research Institute. In 2011, just 30% of evangelicals said they'd be willing to overlook immorality in a political candidate. But now that number has more than doubled to 72%. And interestingly, that's greater than the entire American population, which is only at 61%. So you sit there and you say, evangelicals, according to this poll, care less about morality than the general public. And this Trump effect, I mean, is it basically eroding our morality? Have we, allowed this to happen because we've gotten behind a candidate that is so morally flawed that, we've lost our platform?
Julie, this is why I started by talking about our structure and the way our system is set up, and I'm glad to have the opportunity to address this question, because as you might imagine, I've had this accusation thrown at me quite a bit for the fact that I'm supporting Donald Trump. But the truth is during the primaries, he had over 14 million people vote for him. He smashed the records of numbers of people that he was able to bring out during the primaries. So he is the nominee of one of the major parties, and she is the nominee of the other. You only have a choice between these two. And so it is, it is morally required of us to act out what Scripture tells us to be wise as serpent and gentle as doves. As Christians, so often we want to focus so much on the gentle as doves, we forget about that wise as serpents part. When you have a choice that's in front of you that affects the community writ large of our nation, we have to interact with that. And maybe it's a difficult interaction. But I think that there's a little bit of, in terms of a lot of the hand-wringing and the soul-searching that I'm seeing on the evangelical side, I don't feel that we're seeing enough of the soul-searching over equally difficult and challenging issues with Hillary Clinton. For example,
Well, but wait, because the wrestling isn't that we're voting for Hillary Clinton. Yeah. To me, the more the wrestling, although that is happening.
But I think that's a dodge. I really, with all due respect, Vincent, I think it is a dodge
to say that I'm...
Say.
Okay, Vincent.
Well, I'm referring back to your early statement about not voting for either one.
Well, no, it's not a dodge because I'm in Illinois.
Because Vincent...
How's it a dodge if I'm in Illinois when, unless you have every evangelical, and even if you have every evangelical in Illinois vote for them, I'm not sure that Hillary's still not going to carry Illinois. So how's that a dodge? And how's it a dodge if I'm taking seriously the very government system you're talking about, and I'm talking about the rest of the ticket? I don't think I'm not dodging anything.
I think you are, because you have students who are listening to you. You have people who are watching this program.
I empower my students to think critically about that. I do not indoctrinate my students to tell them how to vote. I try to empower them to think critically so that they can evaluate these things and then decide which person they're going to vote for. And in terms of talking about what Christians ought to do, so if you survey most African American churches, you're going to tell me they're voting for Trump? And you're going to tell me that the concerns that they've had, and this goes back to your question about the Republicans, there's a reason why African Americans are not voting Republican and why the party of Lincoln is not the party that they're supporting anymore.
So Hillary gets off the hook for calling young African American men super predators? Why do we not focus in on that?
There's a whole trajectory of African Americans who aren't even talking about voting for her, and they're very progressive because they think she's the establishment. So and there's people who are bringing up the same thing.
Well,
in fact, it's Black Lives Matter people who are bringing that up. So they brought it up before Republicans did. So the point I'm making is that to say, or basically suggest, you didn't say this, but some people might hear you to say it, suggest that if you don't vote for the Republican candidate, that God's going to be disappointed in you.
No, I absolutely didn't say that.
Okay, that's good. I appreciate that. All of my relatives, basically, when they think about the Republican Party, they think about a party that, in the way that it talks about a free country, talks about free association, they hear, essentially, George Wallace is what they hear. They hear somebody saying, I'm going to let the states roll back enough things so you can get remarginalized. Now, that's what they hear. Republicans need to demonstrate that that's absolutely not what they do. That they absolutely want to care about economic revitalization, care about education in those communities. They need to put their bodies there. They need to put policies there. They need to show solutions and not just oppose democratic ones. I mean, we know the welfare state's a failure. We know there's all kinds of things Democrats haven't done. We know Democrats take African Americans for granted the way basically a lot of Republicans take evangelicals for granted.
Right,
we know all this kind of stuff. But
well, that's an interesting point.
Well, see, this is why I say I feel like Hillary Clinton gets off the hook a little too easily when it comes to racial issues.
Can I throw something in here?
All right,
to a certain degree she
Lutzer,
does. I agree with you.
Dr. Lutzer a chance. Go ahead.
I want to get back to the question that you were raising there when you said, previously evangelicals' character is important and now they say it's unimportant. Well, one reason why that's happened is because we have two candidates, none of whom have very good character, you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. So that's the dilemma. But the other dilemma that I'm concerned about is, on that basis, there are those who, as evangelicals, pastors, some of them are my friends, so I speak with a very compassionate heart, who will actually go on TV and will strongly endorse Trump, and therefore identify the whole, and this of course is what troubles Mr. Moore and apparently also Russell Moore and my friend Al Mohler. The evangelical movement is being identified as the Christian evangelical movement. Now, I want to tell this young lady here, Charmaine, I think it's perfectly fine that you can endorse Trump. I'm talking here about evangelical pastors and leaders who are strongly identified as being evangelical. So that's why I do not endorse a political candidate ever, even if they are good for the reasons I said. But that's the troubling thing that I see, Julie, is the fact that evangelicalism going forward must be very confusing to the people of this world who only marginally understand what evangelicalism is about.
And let me, to that point, Russell Moore said, the damage done to the gospel witness this year will take longer to recover from than those 1980s televangelist scandals. And Michael Ferris, who's the founder of Patrick Henry College, he said when evangelicals went and met with Donald Trump, he said, the premise of the moral majority was that only candidates that reflect a biblical worldview and good character would gain our support. But then he said about the leaders supporting Trump, and he didn't let You know, I mean, Gary Bauer, I know with American Values, head of American Values, but there's also Ralph Reed. To the world, they're evangelical, even though they're not pastors. He said they are saying that we are Republicans no matter what the candidate believes and no matter how vile and unrepentant his character. They are not a phalanx of God's prophets confronting a wicked leader. This is a parade of elephants. And the question, and I thought this was a good point that you made, Vincent, that Republicans have taken the evangelical vote for granted. And just the same way that Democrats have taken the black vote for granted. And we, as Republicans, I'm seeing all these arguments that we have used now coming back in our faces. You know, and if we're going to say to Democrats or to the African American community, the Democrats don't represent you, you shouldn't be voting this way, come over to our side, you know, right? Can't we also say, hey, that we need to buck the system when we have a leader who does not represent our values, does not represent what we believe in?
Well, you know, can I just real quickly say two words, Mike Pence. This is not just the Trump ticket, it is the Trump-Pence ticket. And one thing that came out of that meeting with evangelicals is Donald Trump over and over again on the stump has said that he appreciates the evangelicals. I was at a meeting one time where he, in a very self-deprecatory way, said, you know, that how much he appreciated evangelicals because that was probably the only way he was going to get to heaven was through friendship. You know, now the theology.
No. Actually,
theology aside, you know, the theology is.
I think Jesus has to be
right. So, but theology aside, it was a nice moment because it was a recognition that he was not trying to hold himself out. It was a recognition of some of the
but he
the
calls
wrestling.
himself a Christian. This is what really bothers me. I mean, when it comes to witness,
no.
He has called himself a Christian. Then we have James Dobson saying he's a baby Christian.
He has not been campaigning as a Christian. I think there's been no.
I can tell you on my Facebook page because I've posted things, and I've been an equal critic of Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump. But I will tell you, whenever I criticize Donald Trump, I hear from a lot of evangelical Christians, he's a Christian, he said he was sorry.
But that's not him. That is not him coming out and, let me just finish this thought.
Okay.
So he has the meetings with evangelicals, and following that, you have him appoint a vice presidential candidate who is an evangelical, who is one of us, who is very strong on the life issue.
I would love to vote for Mike Pence.
And well, you have the opportunity to vote for Mike Pence because it is the Trump-Pence ticket.
Joe Biden, how relevant has he been?
He's very relevant because he's part of the administration. There are a lot of things that the vice president does that sets the tone and the tenor of an administration. It's a very powerful position, and it is an indication of respect to the evangelical community that Donald Trump did that. And then he follows on with taking a very hard stance on the life issue in the debates, on talking. I don't know why we haven't, as a community, haven't talked about the fact that in his major economic address in Detroit, not only did he talk about all kinds of other economic policies, but he specifically mentioned extending tax breaks to moms who make the choice to stay at home with their kids. He talked about homeschoolers. He's talked about school choice. So going back to Dr. Lutzer's point about the Republican platform, he has been a very strong advocate in ways that we have asked for years for Republican candidates to be, and yet he's taken it very seriously and done it.
Dr. Lutzer.
Going back to your comment there about evangelicals who have declared him to be a Christian, my heart gets so sad when I hear that, because even if it were true, let the fruit of the Spirit work itself out in Trump's life. Now, you know that I'm a realist. I'm looking at these two candidates, and I've already declared, you know, my leanings. But the fact is that the evangelical community has gotten deeper in its support of Trump than it would even have to be. I mean, Charmaine here, you know, she is on Donald Trump's side. She endorses him, but she isn't calling him a Christian. And I think that that's where there's so much confusion out there. Because, you know, Christians behave differently. And then I can't help but think, do you remember that interview with on CNN where he was asked, you know, Anderson Cooper, did you ever have to ask God for forgiveness? And his answer basically was, well, if I had done something wrong, I would have, but, you know, I built this big company. So what am I trying to say? I'm trying to say here that we as Christians have to make a choice. Character, it cancels each other, you know, because, you know, your point, Charmaine, is very well taken, that it's easy to criticize Trump, but Hillary has a lot more, she's gotten by with more than she should ever get by with. So that's the predicament we're in. Now, let me just throw this in. Let's suppose that you were in a totally atheistic country. I mean, you know, whether it was the Soviet Union at one time or North Korea, whatever. Let's suppose you had an actual, honest election between two people. I think you should choose one or the other. And you don't agree with any of them. You know, they're all atheists. But still, in a fallen world, you make the best choice you can with the hand that you have been dealt. And this is why, even though my brother over here, Vince, whom I respect, and our fellowship will not be broken over this, I really think Christians out there make a choice between Trump and Hillary, and make it not on the basis of character, which cancels itself, but take a look at their platforms.
Okay, let me pull something. One second. Because I'm going to throw it to you.
Oh, okay.
Because what you've just articulated is, in essence, consequentialism to some degree. You're saying we've got two candidates. Neither one's really what any of us would choose, but I mean, this is what we have. So let's choose the one where the consequences will be less severe, or that we think will be better than the other. And this is I think, a good thing about this election, is it's really forced, I know, for me to say, okay, let's rethink a lot of these things, because I've always been a consequentialist with this, but then I've never had candidates that are so morally, I don't even want to say flawed. I mean, they're just beyond the pale in some ways, in my opinion. But I sit there and I say, the problems with consequentialism, it seems to me, is there has to be a limit on it. And there was an article in the Gospel Coalition talking about this. And that if there's not a limit on our consequentialism, well, then we can justify almost any action if the alternate action is worse. And so it makes me wonder, at what point do we say, this doesn't have a political solution, but I can't be on either side? I'm going to throw it to you, Vince.
Well, first of all, this may seem to be an irony about something. The connection what you just said, but it goes back to something earlier. As much as there's hand-wringing, as much as we're talking about, you know, some people are talking about the sky is falling, etc., you know, there are also a lot of people who are talking about, well, maybe we've been too political, we've made too much out of politics. I'm not sure we've made enough of politics in the right sense, because I don't know that evangelicals have thought about politics beyond just attending to certain particulars that are basically crisis management, and not thinking about sort of the long, slow way that the political process generally tends to work. So, I mean, there are people like Charmaine who know a lot about that, but I feel like in some ways evangelicals have been kind of at an arm's length from politics, except for when it's around particular issues. Then people pay a little bit of attention, they think about voting something, but they don't think about, you know, in fact, politics is going on all the time.
Right.
And we need to be forming and encouraging people who are getting involved all the time, rather than think, okay, there's a crisis, maybe people should pay attention to it. There needs to be, especially in a country like this one, you know, at least a kind of general attentiveness to the larger political process. And evangelicals haven't really encouraged people to have that kind of attention to politics.
I want to push the consequential thing.
I'm going to
So where's the limit? Because I want to know at what point your limit's already hit. With Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton, you've already said, this is my limit, I won't go there.
Well, and part of the reason is that is because I don't think only in terms of 4 years. Politics is a long game. History is a long game. I mean, you know, look at the history of this country, and there's been all kinds of peaks, valleys, all kinds of ups and downs, right? And you know, everyone's thinking that this is kind of apocalyptic. It is not apocalyptic. I mean, if you want apocalyptic, as I always like to say, I mean, explain to me why this country is still here after, slavery and Jim Crow, okay? That's something that should have brought an apocalypse. So it hasn't. And here we are, we've got certain kinds of flourishing, certain kinds of things that have been better than they were 20, 30 years ago. things that are crises, things that are matters of great importance now that we need to be concerned about. I mean, some things get better, some things get worse. I mean, that's the way things actually work out in a fallen world.
Let me ask.
Slavery and Jim Crow did bring the apocalypse. Both of those evils in our culture brought real tragedy.
Apocalypse to who? To African Americans.
To all of us.
Civil War was pretty
To all of
apocalyptic.
us.
Yes,
Well,
yes.
Well, I would argue that Jim Crow was apocalyptic to all of us. I think we all suffered.
Well, I wish the most white Americans thought that, but I don't think they do.
I
appreciate you saying that, because I've hardly heard people say that. So thank you.
Okay, let me ask this question, because I want each of you to answer it.
I just want to say, I think we should not, because I'm nervous about people saying this, we should not think about this in such an apocalyptic way that we don't actually see that for all the fracturing and hand-wringing, this is actually an opportunity for the GOP. This is actually an opportunity for people to be thinking about, okay, how do we re-strategize? How do we think about people being more informed? How do we think about people actually understanding that if you're a citizen in the United States and you're a Christian in the United States, you have an opportunity to have, it's a kind of discipleship opportunity you don't have in the Soviet Union, you sure don't have in North Korea, you don't have in Zimbabwe, but you do have here. And you know, and sometimes you're trying to figure out, how do I ever get lemonade out of these lemons? But, you know, 4 years from now, I mean, this is part of the GOP opportunity. Okay, you had 19 people run. Maybe we don't want 19 people running for it. Okay, so if Trump loses and you have this come around 4 years from now, how's the GOP going to strategize now?
And that's a valid question, but I just want to get back to this question with the consequentialism. What is the limit on the consequential?
Well,
how bad would a candidate have to be?
Well, if you had two candidates, I mean, you just have to choose the one that isn't as bad as the other.
Well, so if you had Hitler and Mussolini, what do you do?
Well, I mean, you vote for one or the other. But I want to go back to what our brother.
Well, then you're Bonhoeffer.
Well, I mean, if you had a Well, actually,
is that not an option for us to say, I refuse to participate? See, I come from an Anabaptist tradition, so I'm used to being a separatist. Now, I'm not saying I agree with all my Anabaptist background. I'm not a pacifist, okay? So, but I'm saying I have enough of that tradition, and I've understood as Christians, we are not a part of this culture. We are not to be, and there's a certain degree to which we say, no. I won't be a part of this. It is too evil. I can't do it.
Oh, and that I can understand that.
Well, but
I want to comment though on what
because we're called to be salt and light. That's why.
Well, hold it just a second here.
But isn't our opposition being salt and light? Isn't saying no?
No, because nature abhors a vacuum, and it is going to move forward.
So I mean, Hitler and Mussolini, we really vote for one?
Well,
I mean, don't we say no?
I don't know. If somebody says no, fine, and don't get involved in the political process. But what Vince is saying here is, there's this big picture. The problem is that if a nation goes down the wrong direction, it is impossible to turn it back. I cannot foresee a day, for example.
How is it possible to turn it?
Yep. Go ahead, Dr. Lutzer.
I don't see, for example, a day in America when same-sex marriage is overturned, unless there is a massive, really spiritual awakening, and maybe that's where this discussion should end.
Or the family dissolves to the point that we can't
Well,
exist.
Even so, there are people totally committed to the dissolving of our families. In fact, I could give some evidence of that. They are committed to the destruction of the family because everybody has to be equal, and so everybody has to be equal in their destruction. There was someone who was arguing that the word mother should not be used because it gives special status to some children who know that they have a mother and others who don't. So the point that I'm making is that politics is a long run, but if you're going the wrong direction, turning the clock back is very, very difficult, even in a country like ours.
And it is dire. We're in a dire situation.
It is, but I just talked about slavery and Jim Crow. If you're a slave in 1850, there's no way you think emancipation is happening 13 years from then. And also, honestly, because we're Christians, okay, we do believe in a resurrected Savior. So because we believe in a resurrected Savior, there are things that can happen that can surprise us. So we dare not be people who are becoming agents of despair, irrespective of what happens on election day. To me, it's very, very important. I want to piggyback on something Charmaine said about our participation in the culture. In a sense, we are outside the culture. You know, there's this phrase about politics being downstream from culture. I mean, are we, just as I was talking about with politics, are we encouraging people to be the ones that are contributing to culture formation so that some of the things in our very individualistic culture, which I think, that's sort of key to why you get this sort of, it was a conservative argument for same-sex marriage that kind of got in there. So look, we want people to have what's good for them. So each person can have their individual happiness. Why get in the way of their individual happiness? We've made an idol of individual happiness. Well, how are Christians contributing to culture so that we show there's something greater than just making an idol out of your individual happiness? If we're not contributing to the culture, we're letting other voices be the voices that inform people through all other kinds of narratives. Those narratives eventually are the things that lead to the kind of policies that happen. But we never encourage people to be the ones who say, you know what, you're really good at media, you're really good at certain kinds of things, you're really good at technology, you're really good at politics, you're really good at finance. You ought to really go into that. You really ought to be a leader in that. You ought to be a shaper in that.
And you know what? There are all kinds of people that I know and have worked with over my 30-year career in Washington, D.C., who have invested in the political process, who've invested in being a part of the structure and in the hand-to-hand combat that is Washington, D.C. politics. And that's why I started by saying that this is more than just a vote between Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton. It's the Trump-Pence ticket versus the Hillary-Cain ticket, and then it's their administrations. It's all these people who have invested in politics, who have invested in preparing themselves to be a part of the process. It's Ben Carson, who left being a world-renowned surgeon to be a part of the political process, who will be a political appointee in a Trump administration. It's all kinds of people like that I could put names and faces to, who are part of the Washington, D.C. Arena, who would be a part of a pro-life, pro-family administration moving forward.
We have just a short amount of time, and there's a topic that we have to get to, and that is the gender gap. We've talked a lot about the racial gap. I want to talk about the gender gap for a minute here, especially because Charmaine, we're the women here. That's right. When those lewd comments came out that Donald Trump made, we have Beth Moore coming out saying, I'm one among many women sexually abused, misused, stared down, heckled, talked naughty to like we liked it. We didn't. We're tired of it. Try to absorb how acceptable the disesteem and objectifying of women has been when some Christian leaders don't think it's a big deal. Michelle Bachmann, I love Michelle Bachmann. In fact, I interviewed her just about, actually less than a week before she made these statements, but when she got on and she's like, that's not the real issue. I went, objectifying women isn't an issue, this isn't important. And then Trump, I mean, honestly, it's like he doesn't get it. He really doesn't get it, because he went from, I mean, really, this was a controversy that almost sunk his entire campaign. And then he goes on the road basically saying that these women now who came out who said that he sexually abused them, that they were too ugly to warrant his interest. I mean, that's what he actually said. And the places where he said that, they cheered. And I'm sitting there, I mean, I was so appalled by that and so just absolutely repulsed. And to hear Christians where I feel like, you know, I'm a complementarian, which means I believe that men are to be our providers and protectors. And to hear them saying it's not an issue or it's not that big of a deal, that hurt me on a personal level. It really did. And so I want you to address that, because I think there's an awful lot of women who are feeling like, you know, we trusted these leaders and they're not coming to our defense. So, I mean, how do you, did you feel it personally? Because I felt it personally.
I have to say, as a conservative evangelical woman who is involved in the political process, that this last month has been one of the most painful of my entire life. Yeah. To interact with those accusations, to interact with this whole issue. And as a result, I actually wrote an op-ed that was in the New York Daily News a couple weeks ago, which we won't have enough time to get into everything. But I wanted to really explain where I was coming from. And one of the, I came of age during the first I was in the Reagan White House, and then, followed on by the Clinton White House and all of the scandals with Monica Lewinsky. And one of the things that I think Hillary Clinton has gotten away with with the least amount of attention being paid to is what she did during that scandal to the people who came forward. She worked to destroy Monica Lewinsky. It was not just the fact that her husband was having an affair. That's the way everyone wants to retroactively remember how that situation happened, and it's not. That is not what happened.
So there's misogyny on both sides. There's no doubt about it.
And
it
that's
comes
why
in
I
different
think
forms.
we have to cancel, and we have to look at these. These are the two platforms. You know, that's where I come down on. And
Can I just add really quickly? Another thing is that he has elevated the first female campaign manager in the Republican Party history. You know, there are two sides here to this story. We don't know all the facts. I am disturbed by the accusations, but Melania Trump came out and said she thought it needed to be tried in a court of law, and I would agree wholeheartedly. I think that's where it belongs.
Our time is running out. Any last thoughts, Dr. Lutzer?
well, what I would like to say is this, that we have to bear in mind that that which brings us together, namely the gospel of Jesus Christ, is much stronger and much more important than that which divides us. And I would say to those evangelicals who aren't going to vote at all or vote for somebody else, I disagree with you, but we're not going to break fellowship. I think what the evangelical community needs to do, no matter who is elected, we need to publicly come together. I think that we need to be able to say to the world that we're sorry for many of the things that have been said, and it's been very confusing. But at the end of the day, we have a Savior. Now, the reason that's important is because of the fact that the person who's going to be elected is going to have to deal with an angry, divided nation. And the church is going to have to say, we're together on this, and we have hope for you in Jesus Christ.
Well, we could talk about this much longer, and I wish we had longer to talk about it, but I have really enjoyed this hour and enjoyed what each of you had to say. And even though there were some fireworks, I do know, as you said, Dr. Lutzer, what unites us far greater than what divides us. So again, thanks to Dr. Charmaine Yoest, a senior fellow with American Values, and also Dr. Erwin Lutzer, pastor emeritus at the Moody Church, and Dr. Vincent Bacote, director of the Center for Applied Christian Ethics at Wheaton College. Well, in 1 Thessalonians, we're told to test all things and hold on to what is true. And so I encourage you, pray over what you've heard today. Ask for the Lord's guidance as you engage in the political process. And then on November 8th, please vote your conscience. And by all means, vote. We are called to be salt and light. And that means we engage and we do our best to bless this country. But I also think we need to keep in mind that as important as politics is, it is not ultimately important. And though politics may impact our lives in significant ways, it does not determine our destiny, nor the ultimate destiny of our country. God alone does that. So in closing, I'd like to leave you with a prediction for November 9th that author and pastor Max Lucado made. He said, "I know exactly what November 9 will bring. Another day of God's perfect sovereignty. He will still be in charge. His throne will still be occupied, and he will still manage the affairs of the world." Friends, God is never dependent on a president to accomplish his will, and so even if our worst nightmare occupies the White House, we don't have to panic. Even if we lose our religious freedoms, God will still be in control. So let's pray, and let's faithfully engage, and let's extend grace to our brothers and sisters with whom we disagree, and let's make every effort to keep the unity of the Spirit through the bond of peace. Thanks so much for watching, and thanks to the Illinois Family Institute and TLN for making this broadcast possible. God bless you, and God bless America.